Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, back to the latest edition of the Woke Bros. Of course, I'm your co-host, Big Waz, joined as aka Wazzy Lambre. I almost forgot. Joined as always by my brother on the west side of Los Angeles, Nando Vila. What's going on? And we
Doing good.
and we do have a very special show today because we have a very special guest, my brother, professor at UW, the University of Washington in Seattle. More importantly, an Ivy League elite. He comes from the ruling class, ladies and gentlemen. My brother Daniel Bessner. What's up, DB?
Hey, was happy to be here representing my class and its interests. Thank you for having me on.
I love it. On today's show, man, we do want to get into some of the U.S. sanctions in Afghanistan, which it's hard to understand what the reasoning is. I think the shit we've gotten out of the White House has been super opaque and just very just like, talking points bullshit. There hasn't really been an explanation for it besides, well, we just feel like it because we can. We want to get into that towards the end of the show. But first, man, DB, you're definitely my smartest foreign policy, smart foreign policy friend. It's your area of expertise about American empire. And in the news recently, there's just been a lot of reporting about the atrocities of the drone war. Just like how insanely horrific the consequences of the drone war actually were, how all of this shit got covered up, and just like basically the outcome, what I've taken from it, DB, is it's like there's never been a coherent rationale for any of this. There's never been any oversight, and the people we allow to adjudicate the drone war are kind of psychopaths. And so, New York Times just put out a story again. We got all this credit for getting out of Afghanistan, for getting out of Kabul, but of course we couldn't leave without leaving them a nice little souvenir like that herpes you got in Cancun. They dropped the freaking drone and it killed like 10 kids for no reason. And again, they call these shits targeted attacks, and they're just killing civilian targets all the freaking time. Of course, Dave Phillips on the New York Times has done some incredible reporting about a drone strike way back in the I think it was like 09, 08 around the time. I just know Obama was president, where these dudes bombed up a hiding shelter. A drone strike the hiding shelter and killed, on the conservative estimate, 70 people, and what most experts think was about 100 innocent people. No terrorists, no bad guys, women, children hiding from drone strikes. Killed 100 of them. And they're just now doing an investigation, and maybe somebody might be held to account for this, DB. And all of that is preamble to say, like, what the fuck is up with the drone war, bro?
Yeah, it's a really important question, and I think it's to really understand it, you have to put it in this kind of large historical context. So I'm going to go back in the past, but just for a second. So we are all well aware of the Vietnam War, and that there were a lot of mass protests against the Vietnam War. And these protests were actually effective. First, in kind of winding down the use of troops in the late 1960s and early 1970s, and pushing the Vietnam War to be fought with bombing. But also, more important, the protests demonstrated to American elites that they couldn't necessarily rely on the American public to fight the war without complaint, right? Even though it was a lot of working class people, there were also middle class people and bourgeoisie involved in the war. So in 1973, the American Congress decided essentially not to renew the draft. So you have a period from 1940 to 1973 where there's like a mass draft. The average American has like a real chance of fighting a war. That isn't true after 1973. So you begin to get a turn from 1973 onward toward what might be termed precision war or more accurate war. So this is reflected in a variety of ways, but from our perspective today, you see it with the use of drones, and I'll get to those in a second, and also the use of special forces. The idea was that you couldn't fight mass-based wars, you couldn't rely on the populace, so you needed to run the American empire in a more precise way with less cost to American people. Also, they would claim that there was also going to be less costs to the enemies of the United States. So it's a form of humane war. It's like humanity, right? So drones start being used a little bit throughout this period. They're used a little bit by George W. Bush during the War on Terror, but they really take off during the take off, what a pun, during the administration of Barack Obama, right? So when Barack Obama comes into office, he says, I'm not going to be like Bush. He goes, listen, Bush is right? You gotta, there's all these terrorists. You can't just let them go around. But what I'm going to do, I'm not going to fight mass wars like Iraq or Afghanistan, really Iraq. I'm not going to fight mass wars like Iraq. I'm going to fight precise wars, and they're going to be legal, and they're going to be humane. And the drone becomes Obama's preferred instrument. Why? Because there is, it doesn't involve the American people first and foremost. It's cheap as well. You could kind of deploy them overseas. And also what Obama did is that he institutionalized a process. He just made a process whereby he would like literally go over kill lists. And someone would say, we have this intelligence. Like every week he would go over, there'd be a kill list.
It's insane.
And yeah. And this is just, you could look at he talks about it in his memoir, which I actually talked about on the show. But he goes over these kill lists, and then he's like, my lawyers say this is legal, and we're going to go drone these people. Now, the problem, as all this reporting has suggested, is that any sort of military action is going to rely on intelligence. How do you know? Unless you might hear something, you might intercept something, but oftentimes you're relying on human intelligence on the ground. So how do you know who to drone? It's ultimately, you can't abstract it. You can't just decide the algorithm. You need some human component. And what has often happened is that people lied. People used, tried to use the United States
to kill their enemies. Yep.
The U.S. just got it wrong. We can't just blame people on the ground. The U.S. got shit wrong. They had bad intelligence. They misunderstood things. And so you wind up having, the famous droning of a wedding, or these sorts of human rights violations of the murder of tens of innocents, dozens of innocents, hundreds of innocents, which seem to have been underreported at the very least by the U.S. government. So you have this perverse situation where the United States is essentially fighting war on the cheap, making use of oftentimes bad human intelligence and just killing innocents on the ground. And you're able to do it because there's no consequences for the average American.
Yeah. And it's, we lost you maybe. Oh yeah. And it's funny because you mentioned it on the cheap, but it seems like to me like the military budget keeps on going up anyway. I mean, it is like the specific actions of drone strikes are cheap, but the overall military budget keeps on going up. I mean, obviously, we know it's just kind of a giant giveaway to defense contractors and things like that, and that they don't actually use it for anything. Even accepting the premise that we need to fight people abroad all the time to destroy our enemies. I don't believe that, but imagine if I did, it would even still be kind of an insanely bloated military budget. Because like they don't use most of it for that purpose anyway. But the thing about the drone policy that I think is particularly horrifying is that, as you said, because there is no cost to American lives outside of like maybe some PTSD for these drone pilots, which happens all the time. It just becomes this thing that exists in the background. It just becomes, you okay?
God bless you.
Yeah. Sorry. Thank you.
Yeah, it's okay. It just becomes this kind of background noise of killing. I remember like when I was at Fusion, like I did this video that went viral back in the days when things like that happened, where I just went around asking people how many countries like are we bombing right now, which is just like a super simple question. And I'm pretty sure that if you asked like members of Congress, that I'm not sure that like even
is there a way to even know that though?
Well, there isn't, but I'm talking about like of publicly available.
Yeah,
I'm talking about like of publicly available information. You know, even the stuff that we do in theory know that's in
Like
public.
Yemen, kinda.
Yeah,
Even though we're saying, well, that's actually the Saudis are
Somalia.
doing it. It's not. I mean, it's
Right.
not us. It's the Saudis.
Yeah,
We're just giving
with our intelligence. Yeah.
But
Right.
we were bombing. We were doing direct drone strikes in Yemen as well. Like
Of course.
it's a lot of like Saudi aiding, but we were literally bombing Yemen as well. I mean, maybe not to the scale of other places, but it existed. And
It wasn't
again, I'm
great,
just talking
yeah.
about like stuff that's publicly available information. Again, assuming that there's also strikes that happen that are classified that we don't know about and things like that. Even that question, two members of Congress, like I don't know how many of them
I don't think
would
Biden
know.
knows. I would
doubt.
bet my life Biden doesn't know.
Yeah,
If
exactly.
there was a gun to my head, no way. I bet he'd
Which
be
is
off by like 10 too. Yeah.
But it's one of those things that you stop and think about, and you're like, "That's crazy."
Yeah.
You know, like I don't know. If Spain was bombing someone, they would know. Everyone would know. It'd be like
and
they'd be
it's
dominating the
because
news.
ostensibly they're doing it in our names to our benefit, allegedly.
Yeah.
So we should know. And the thing that I wanted to get into it with you, DB, is because you talk about the bad intelligence that the U.S. receives, and I want people to think about this. Let's just say hypothetically, we started some type of war with Mexico. And we relied upon Mexican intelligence, right? Like, at least theoretically, we could be like, yo, there's Mexican people here who are probably good Mexican Americans, could figure out a way to get information out in Mexico. It'd be really hard. I think we've seen throughout the course of the drug war that they can't get fucking good information in Mexico. But let's just humor me, excuse me. You'd be like, all right, well, we could probably get some good info in Mexico just because of the proximity, a better understanding of Mexican culture, Mexican history, Mexican norms, all of that shit. Like, we could probably kind of figure some shit out because Mexico's right there. Same with Canada, right? We could get Celine Dion to be in the CIA. We could do all kinds of shit and be like, yo, how do we get, if we went to war with Canada, theoretically, we could probably get some good intel. How the fuck we getting good intel in Afghanistan? How the fuck are we supposed to do that when we just parachuted into that motherfucker? Nobody knows us. We don't know them. We don't know anything about the history. We didn't know anything about the tribal differences. We don't know nothing about these people. And then we come in and we're just spreading money, spreading violence, all of this shit. And we're supposed to get good intelligence?
It's absolutely absurd. And the United States, if you look at the history of Afghanistan, it just went back and forth in its strategies, whether it was counterterrorism or then counterinsurgency, or then, these various people that they were funding. It was primarily, I think, as a lot of reporting has seen, just a way to make money for contractors. And I don't think like the people are not consciously thinking it. I think this is important to understand. It's not like people are like waking up and like putting their hands together like Mr. Burns and trying to be some sort of conspiratorial thing. It's just the nature of the system. If you're a defense contractor under capitalism, you make money off of war. You make money off of large military budgets. So if you're Raytheon or you're Boeing, you're spending a lot of money lobbying Congress to constantly increase the military budget. Military budget's near $800 billion. You know how that's roughly, I think, a third of the discretionary budget of the United States. And could you imagine all the shit that thing could actually be used for? But we have a system in place that incentivizes and encourages certain types of behavior. And so the question then becomes, I think, for all of us who want to use that money for good and don't want to kill innocent people abroad, is how do you change that system? It's a really difficult question, which is no easy solution, but I hope people are just realizing how absolutely corrupt it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that's been horrifying about Afghanistan specifically is, we fought a war there that lasted 20 years, killed. Yeah, it's really impossible to know how many people we killed, but probably, in the hundreds of thousands. And
it's difficult to separate like directly killed from effects of war and migration and things like that. Right. These are the numbers that are tough to get. Yeah.
Right. But we can assume it's in 100,000 plus
easily.
We got out for the most part. There's still some private military contractors there, and then we just imposed these economic sanctions on them, which I'm reading from Jeff Stein. Jeff Stein's reporting on it. That's something like 23 million of Afghanistan's 33 million people are like under threat of severe famine, and it's directly like this is a country that was at war up until like 2 seconds ago. And now as a result of these sanctions is literally starving to death. And outside of like, the obvious cruelty of it, I struggle to understand the rationale.
The rationale behind why we continue to fight wars, you mean?
No. But why we insist upon
sanction?
this kind of
what's the sanction?
Why
what's the thinking there?
Why
we need to starve the country?
I think there's I think the official rationale is like it's the Taliban, and we don't like the Taliban because we've been fighting them for 20 years. But I think if one was do Freudian analysis, it's just like we lost and we're getting revenge on a people that we've done terrible things to for 20 years. And I think that there's sort of this worry about prestige and American reliance, and I think it's mostly bullshit. This is kind of the talk you hear in the foreign policy establishment, is that they're worried about America's international prestige and whether they can be trusted by allies, particularly in the region, because this is like, it's ridiculous. It's related to like China, and people aren't going to think we're going to like fight China if we just give up on Afghanistan. I think it's mostly horseshit, and I think it's just mostly people are unable to question a lot of their fundamental assumptions about the justice propagated by the United States and the good propagated by the United States. And then you see things like crippling sanctions that really, really harm entire populations over and over again. There's a wanton cruelty to the American empire that people just don't face up to, particularly if your job is to, defend it and provide the ideas for it. And so this is where you get into this brutal situation, and there's no consequences because, as we said, Americans don't vote on it and they're not really affected by it. So the United States could be the 800-pound gorilla trampling around the world over and over and over again, from Vietnam to Afghanistan, and nothing's going to change because we're so overwhelmingly powerful.
Yeah, it just seems like, I don't know. And the thing is, these things aren't secret. That's the thing that makes it feel so fucking helpless, right? It's not like, the My Lai massacre or any of that stuff that's like there's a cover up and it's kept on, from the light of the public, or like nobody has any way of knowing what's going on. Like these things are deeply reported. Like with the freaking drone strike, it's on the New York Times website. There's fucking video of it, of just the horrors of all of this stuff. Because to me, I'm like, yo, if the Taliban figured out a way to strike somewhere, and I don't even want to say here in the US, I want to say Iowa or Nebraska. You know what I mean? somewhere in the heartland where it's nothing but
where real Americans live.
Exactly.
Not like us three.
Not like us. No.
Coastal elites.
Coastal elite scumbag fake Americans. Yeah. No. I'm talking about real Americans in the Dust Bowl or some shit. And
people who watch Yellowstone and not Succession.
Exactly. And 100 people died as a result of that strike. We would call that's terrorism. That's straight up an act of terrorism. There's no other way to shape it. If the Taliban came out and said, nah, but we meant to hit that one military base over there, and but then it got crossed and then it got messed up. We meant to hit the military. We meant to hit the the fucking weapons storage facility. But we didn't meant to kill no Heartland babies. What the hell? Sorry about that. That was just a mistake. Casualty of war. Hell no. That shit would be a fucking act of terrorism. We'd be at the UN talking about, yo, fucking everybody get with us. We're about to, not only are we going to fucking go to war with them, we're about to crush this country. All of it would be the end of the world. These motherfuckers, they're doing this shit for all we know, at least 4 or 5 times a year, probably more, over the course of like 15 years.
Yeah,
it's insane.
They drone striked in Afghanistan. They drone striked the Doctors Without Borders hospital. Do you guys remember that story?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no,
doctor. Like, I feel like that story. I remember when I read it. When I first read it, I couldn't believe it. I was like, this has to be the thing that like gets people. A Doctors Without Borders hospital. We'd fucking obliterate it. in a drone strike. And it was just like oops, sorry, didn't mean to. Let's move on. No one gave a shit.
Yeah,
Obviously,
and I
people,
think that's like something that we need to deal with, like that people really don't give a shit.
they don't.
Because they're
Yeah.
hurting at home. It's hard to have empathy for people who you feel no connection to. But for whatever the reason, um, people really just seem to not really care. And
We
that's a
got to
depressing
reinstitute the
thing.
draft.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
feel
Yeah.
I feel like that's the only thing that would
Get
get people to
people's
give a
skin in
fuck.
the game.
No,
Yeah,
for sure. And I want to ask you, DB, because I feel like if I can translate Pope Barack Obama, if I'm allowed to, when he comes up with the explanation for why he does drone warfare, basically it feels like what he's saying is war basically is, when it comes to America abroad, like it is. We're going to be bombing something somewhere pretty much no matter what. And this is the most efficient way for us to carry out that objective. But why do we have to accept the first premise? It's not like he goes about a detailed explanation as to why we're constantly in a perpetual state of war with some people abroad, right? Who always happen to be non-white, by the way. Like what what can we like? Can we like brainstorm as to why that is?
Well, I think like Obama at least is an institutionalist, and he basically, like you're saying, was exactly never questioned the premises of American empire or the American
Mm.
hegemony or the fact that the United States needs to rule the world, because people have been arguing, and he is one of the people who believe this, that peace and prosperity, U.S. peace and prosperity, but also global peace and prosperity, national glory, national economics, all depend on the United States being the global leader, and leader really, empire and hegemon. And so what Obama's sort of like compromise, his humane compromise, he said that we'll still do this shit, but it will be legal and there will be a definite process behind it, right? You won't have like random ad hoc statements like you had under George W. Bush with John Yoo sort of writing the infamous torture memos and things like that.
They was doing that shit on the fly, like literally. All right, I just wrote this thing up. Go do what you gotta do.
Exactly. So Obama's like, we're going to regularize it, because
Yeah.
this is a liberal solution, right? You're going to institutionalize it, you're going to bureaucratize it, and therefore, theoretically, is you're going to domesticate it. But the problem is that war can't be domesticated.
Yep.
As my old friend Rip Van Riper said, war is ultimately like a qualitative thing. It relies on passions. It's unmodelable. So it's a fantasy to believe that you're going to be able to tame it through that sort of regular interaction. But this is ultimately the premise of liberalism itself. And one of the reasons why liberalism is failing, because its promises aren't historically true. Right. You can't actually regularize human life like that. So you have all of these disasters like we're just talking about, and there's no way out. And this is why you need a different form of politics. Liberalism has proven just incorrect.
Yeah, people talk about like, Napoleon was a military genius because he won all those battles. And it's true, he probably was like better than most generals as a military strategist or whatever. But like the fact that the French army at the time was run by was manned by soldiers who saw themselves as Frenchmen, citizens, like the first kind of citizen army, and they had a stake in the country's success and all that stuff. Whereas all the people they were fighting, they were like prisoners and mercenaries and slaves, essentially, people who didn't give a shit whether they really won or lost, and they just like kicked their ass every time. And like that's like there's more focus on the nuts and bolts of like, oh, he did this flanking maneuver and the whatever the fuck, but like they wanted it more too, and that probably had a lot to do with it. That it's not about the like what you said, the liberal institutionalization, like the structures that they do. It's like there is an element of like, oh yeah, we're people fighting for our homeland, and you guys are just forced to do this at gunpoint. So like we're gonna have an advantage.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I mean it is a bleak reality, because I think that one of the sort of coming struggles or whatever, the coming questions, is this confrontation with China, right? That it seems like for a while there, the United States and China were kind of simpatico in that China was, a giant market for American firms, but also a source of cheap labor. And both of those things are kind of going away a little bit. Like you're seeing, I just saw that China is now blocking most, even Disney movies and Marvel movies. Even Shang-Chi didn't get as wide a release as they wanted to,
because they wanted
in
domestic
China.
industry. Is that
They
wanted domestic
exactly
industry?
right. That
Yeah.
for the years that they
Import
allowed
substitution. Yeah.
totally, it's
Yeah,
exactly what it is.
Yeah.
Like for the years that they allowed American movies to come in, it was really just to buy them time to train up their own domestic ability to produce movies that Chinese people would rather watch. And that seems like it's happening. Like they've produced a few blockbusters in China that have been huge. And now what they're doing is they're just basically blocking American movies from coming. So
that's really interesting, Nando. I did not know that. That's super.
I'll send you some literature.
Send me that. That's a gigantic shift. Yeah.
Enormous. Like Marvel, Disney is has been the leader in sort of trying to open up the Chinese market for films. Famously, the CEO of Disney went and apologized to the premier of China in 1997 because they produced Kundun, Martin Scorsese's Kundun, which is about Tibet.
And Beauty and the Beast. Remember that? There was the kiss in there, a male kiss that they took out. Yeah.
Exactly. And, famously the CEO of Disney goes like, I'm very sorry for producing this film. The good thing is nobody watched it, like he made a joke about like how it was a huge flop. But they really pushed to open up the Chinese market. There's theme parks in China, Disney theme parks in China, all that stuff. But in the past couple of years, they've started to limit the amount of American films that are screened in China, and they're limiting their release. And Disney produced Shang-Chi, this like Chinese movie with Chinese actors and Chinese mythology, in an attempt to basically show good faith that they were going to play ball essentially. And the Chinese are still like, nope, we're going to produce our own movies, and we're not going to allow your movies to come in. So as that process happens,
that's going to be gigantic. Oh my God.
It's enormous. Like, just wait till they ban the NBA,
I think the NBA is already done too, though. I think it's a wrap for the NBA. I think that whole excursion is kind of just like, all right, this thing is kind of run its course. And I'm glad you brought that up, Nando, in relation to China and America. Like my thinking has always been like, if the ruling class, our oligarchs are who set our fucking government policy, and those people's financials are so inextricably bound up in China, how the fuck are we gonna go to war with China? We'd be going to war with ourselves, right?
That's what's interesting. I think Wos hit the nail on the head. It's different from the Soviet Union because the United States and Soviet Union didn't really have.
They don't do business together.
Yeah. And so both China. So this is the big question because
Apple's gonna let us go to war with China.
Right.
So Walmart's gonna let us go to war with China.
So these are a couple things. So historically, the relationship has been China provides cheap labor for U.S. materials. But if China, the CCP in particular, the Communist Party, wants to maintain domestic legitimacy, it has to improve domestic consumption. Because the promise is you'll be able to live like a middle-class American. This is the promise of development in India and China, but in China in particular. And so the problem, though, is that if people start living like Americans, we're going to cook the fucking planet even quicker than we have been. So there's a fundamental tension there because if every person in the Chinese middle class consumed like us, every person in the American middle class, that would be disastrous. One, we're not even sure there's enough material on Earth. Two, it'll definitely have negative climate impact. So this is a tension that the party is going to have to, paper over somehow. Usually states do that through some sort of nationalist war, but China doesn't want it. War is also bad for business now. It's not like in the 1500s when you conquer a person, you steal their aristocrats and you get a ton of money, or it's a Franco-Prussian war and you like empty the French treasury. This is like this wars and business, which is what the Chinese state also relies on. So we're really entering uncharted territory in terms of these sorts of gigantic geopolitical questions that we need to take seriously.
Yeah.
Wow, great news as always on the Folk Bros, man. I gotta say, we're always bringing in the sunny, shiny news, Nando.
The world is bleak,
it's really bleak.
It is a weird time, especially especially if you're an American. Like you're in this kind of weird state of
Decay
anti-politics.
and decline.
Yeah, economic decline, and anti-politics, and like that politics, the political avenues are kind of shut.
Nando, did you read my article on that? The End of Mass Politics with
I
Mark?
did read
Yes, I read
your
that
article
as
on
well.
and I even sent it to Woz.
Yes,
Hell
sir.
yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
But
so,
no,
yeah,
and
so-
it was really
sorry.
well put. I mean, it's something that I've been thinking about for a while now. Obviously, I don't have the academic training to crystallize it in a beautiful little article, but it's something you think about a lot, because like you cover all this, you cover the politics, you look at the ins and outs, and then nothing really happens ever,
Right.
and people get really mad, and they get mad at each other.
Like
and
nothing happens to, like, not even like, oh, like this thing that has popular will, like that's like 53% of Americans want it. Like,
Yeah.
we're talking about shit that's 75,
Yeah, it's crazy.
80% of Americans want a thing.
Free
and it
childcare.
doesn't
Everyone
happen.
wants that,
And it doesn't happen. Straight up. There's
Yeah.
no political way to get it done. It straight doesn't happen.
I think that's
insane.
Sorry, Wes. I think that's why people are going insane.
Yeah.
Because like all they do, they spend all their fucking time thinking about politics, tweeting about politics, and then Joe Biden today comes out and like falls asleep and slips on a banana peel, and then nothing changes. And so there's this disconnect between this constant churn of political discussion and political coverage and political investment, and then literally nothing changes. And in fact, if you're an American of the middle class, your life just keeps getting slightly shittier every year. So think about, for us, there's been 7% inflation, right? And so maybe we all probably didn't get 7% raises necessarily, right? So each of our dollars that was worth $1 last year is now worth 7% less. And it's these types of things that things get more expensive and our lives get increasingly shitty. And so that's why people are going insane. I think that's a really big reason for it.
Yeah.
Well, again, that's our show for today. We would like to thank the historian, Daniel Bessner. Please tell the people where they can find you. American Prestige, again, that's a weekly listen for me. That's how I keep up with foreign policy news. Please tell the people where they can find you, DB.
Yeah, so you could find me on Twitter at dbessner, and like Woz said, American Prestige. And this week we've got the second interview with Noam Chomsky, the meeting of the two great minds of the 20th century and 21st. Me and Chomsky are going head to head, and so check that out.
All right, that's our show for this week. We'll see you guys next week. Peace. We're out of here.
Later.
Good stuff, DB. Thank you, man.
Oh, yeah.